I'd like to share a story about the night that changed everything. The night when 12 years of marriage ended in an upscale Boston restaurant, surrounded by my husband's new colleagues. The night when Andrew Wilson, the man who'd promised to love me forever, raised his champagne glass and introduced the statuesque redhead beside him as his upgrade. The night he looked straight into my eyes with a mixture of triumph and disdain, completely unaware that in just 14 days, he'd discover I wasn't just Olivia Wilson, his supposedly unambitious wife. I was Olivia Blackwell, the founder and CEO of the very company he'd just been hired to help lead. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Cassandra, my new beginning, Andrew announced, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of La Maison Rouge, where we were supposed to be celebrating our 12th anniversary. Cassandra Matthews, as I would later learn was her full name, beamed beside him in a form-fitting emerald dress that complemented her striking red hair. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread, polished, confident, and clearly reveling in her position beside my husband. She understands drive and ambition in ways that some people just never will, Andrew continued, his eyes finding mine across the table, holding my gaze with shocking callousness. The irony of his statement might have made me laugh under different circumstances. Instead, I sat motionless, the small velvet box containing his anniversary gift, a custom vintage watch engraved with our wedding date, feeling suddenly heavy in my clutch. There's a particular kind of silence that falls when something unforgivable happens in public. The clinking of silverware ceases. Conversations halt mid-sentence. Even the soft classical music playing in the background seems to fade away. In that terrible stillness, I counted 5 slow heartbeats while the 8 other people at our table, all high-ranking executives from Meridian Financial Group, where Andrew had just accepted a position as Director of Strategic Investment, registered what was happening. Cassandra broke the silence with practiced ease. "Andrew has told me so much about you," she said, her Boston accent softened by what sounded like years of careful elocution training. "It's admirable how you've supported his career all these years." Her fingers, adorned with a sapphire ring, that looked remarkably similar to one I'd mentioned liking months ago, traced patterns on his shoulder. Some women just aren't cut out for the corporate lifestyle. I felt every gaze at the table, the discomfort, the secondhand embarrassment, the pity, and beneath it all, a silent question. What would I do? Andrew had calculated everything perfectly. The public setting, the audience of new colleagues he needed to impress, the timing on what should have been our special night. He knew me well enough to expect I wouldn't make a scene. For 12 years, I'd been the supportive wife who stood in the background, who appeared to dim her own light, so he could shine brighter. What Andrew didn't know, what he had never bothered to discover during our marriage, was that I had never been dimming my light at all. I had simply been focusing it elsewhere. "Olivia?" Andrew prompted when I remained silent, a hint of irritation crossing his face. "Aren't you going to welcome Cassandra to our celebration?" Something shifted inside me then, a tectonic plate moving after years of pressure. The elegant restaurant, with its crystal chandeliers and heavy burgundy drapes, seemed to recede around the edges of my vision as I reached a crossroads. Collapse inward or stand my ground. I reached for my water glass, buying time as I considered my options. The cool condensation against my fingers anchored me to the moment. Andrew expected tears or pleading. He expected me to disintegrate before his colleagues, confirming whatever narrative he'd likely constructed about his increasingly distant, emotionally unstable wife. Instead, I smiled, the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "What an unexpected anniversary gift," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Though I suppose I should have anticipated this, given all those late nights at the office." I turned to Cassandra, whose smile faltered slightly. "A word of advice. When he tells you he's working late, check his credit card statements. The Four Seasons shows up as business development and consulting on the bill. A woman at the far end of the table, Charlotte Prescott, the wife of senior partner William Prescott, if I remembered correctly, choked slightly on her wine, her eyes widening as they darted between Andrew and me with sudden interest. "Olivia," Andrew warned, his jaw tightening, "you're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I asked, taking a deliberate sip of water. "I thought that was your specialty tonight." Cassandra shifted uneasily, her confident posture wavering momentarily. "Good. Let her see what she was signing up for." "I think we should all enjoy this lovely dinner," Andrew said with forced lightness, turning to the table. "After all, we're celebrating new beginnings, my position at Meridian Financial and," he squeezed Cassandra's waist, "other new developments." The conversation around the table resumed awkwardly, everyone too polite or too uncomfortable to acknowledge what had just transpired. I sat motionless, my meal untouched, my mind racing beyond the humiliation of the moment to something colder and more calculated. What Andrew didn't know, what he had never bothered to ask during our 12-year marriage, was exactly what I did during those long hours when I was supposedly supporting his career from home. He had assumed I was merely keeping his house, managing his social calendar, and being his perfect corporate wife. The truth was far more interesting. I excused myself to the restroom, walking with deliberate steadiness through the restaurant. Only when the heavy door swung shut behind me did I allow my hands to shake. I gripped the marble countertop, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger. Perfectly styled chestnut hair, carefully applied makeup, designer dress that Andrew had once complimented as appropriately elegant, all the external trappings of the role I'd been playing. Are you all right?" A woman emerged from one of the stalls, Charlotte Prescott, the senior partner's wife. Her eyes held genuine concern rather than pity. "Perfect," I said, reaching for a paper towel with trembling fingers. "Nothing like being publicly discarded on your anniversary to build character." Charlotte's mouth tightened. "Andrew has always been ambitious, but this," she shook her head, "bringing her to a dinner with firm partners, it's not just cruel to you, it's unprofessional." I laughed without humor. Andrew has always excelled at combining cruelty with career advancement. Two birds, one stone. "Olivia," Charlotte hesitated, lowering her voice, "William speaks very highly of your investment insights. He mentioned you've consulted on a few matters for him privately. If you ever wanted to turn that into something more formal." The irony of the moment wasn't lost on me. Here was Charlotte Prescott offering me a professional lifeline minutes, after my husband had humiliated me in front of her husband. What she didn't know, what almost no one knew, was how unnecessary her offer was. "Thank you, Charlotte. That's very kind." I reapplied my lipstick with steady hands, a small act of armor. "But I think I'll be just fine." She nodded, seeming to understand that further conversation wasn't welcome. As the door closed behind her, I allowed myself 30 seconds, counting each one silently, to feel the full force of what had just happened. The betrayal, the humiliation, the calculated cruelty of Andrew's timing and method. Then I straightened my shoulders and made a decision. Andrew had orchestrated tonight as the end of our story, his triumphant exit from a marriage that no longer served his ambitions, with an audience to witness my humiliation. But he had miscalculated. This wasn't the end. It was merely the beginning of something he couldn't possibly anticipate. I took out my phone and made a brief call. "Marcus, it's Olivia. Remember that contingency plan we discussed? It's time." I paused, listening to his response. "Yes, everything. And Marcus? I want to be in the office tomorrow morning. It's time everyone met the actual CEO." When I returned to the table that night, the conversation had shifted to Andrew's new position at Meridian Financial Group. He was explaining, with practiced modesty, how they had pursued him aggressively for the Director of Strategic Investment role. They practically created the position for me, he boasted, seemingly having forgotten or dismissed the earlier tension. Said they needed someone with my particular expertise to handle their most sensitive investment portfolios. How fascinating, I commented, sliding back into my seat. And this position reports directly to the CEO? Andrew looked briefly irritated at the interruption. Through the COO, but yes, ultimately to Meridian's CEO. And have you met this mysterious CEO yet? I asked, taking a sip of my wine. Not yet, Andrew replied dismissively. Apparently they're traveling. I'll meet them next week at the quarterly leadership retreat. He turned back to the table. As I was saying, they've given me considerable latitude with the upcoming Harrington merger. I sat quietly for the remainder of the dinner, observing Andrew in his element, commanding attention, dropping hints about exclusive deals, positioning himself as indispensable to his new firm. Cassandra hung on his every word, playing her role perfectly. The adoring, impressed girlfriend, occasionally shooting triumphant glances in my direction. Little did either of them know that in exactly 14 days, at the Meridian Financial Leadership Retreat in the Berkshires, Andrew would be meeting his new CEO, the majority owner who operated behind a wall of holding companies and investment trusts. The woman whose financial acumen had built Meridian from a regional firm into one of the most respected boutique investment companies on the East Coast. The woman who had specifically approved his hiring, curious to see if the man she had married had grown into someone deserving of the position. The woman he had just publicly discarded as his upgrade sat glittering on his arm. As the evening finally drew to a close, Andrew didn't even bother to see if I had a way home. He and Cassandra departed first, his hand possessively on the small of her back as they weaved between tables toward the exit. I watched them go, already mentally calculating the steps that would unfold over the coming days. Do you need a ride home, Olivia? William Prescott asked quietly once they'd gone, his eyes holding something more than sympathy, respect, and perhaps a hint of anticipation. No, thank you, William, I replied, gathering my purse. I have a car waiting, but I appreciate the offer. I paused, then added casually, I look forward to seeing everyone at the leadership retreat next week. His eyebrows rose slightly before his professional mask returned. Of course, it should be illuminating. As I walked out of the restaurant into the cool evening air, I felt strangely calm. The humiliation of the evening was already transforming into something else, a clarifying force burning away the last of my hesitation. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. For years, I had kept my professional life separate from my marriage, building something of my own while maintaining the facade Andrew needed, the supportive, admiring wife who posed no threat to his ego. That facade had served its purpose, and now it was time to let it fall away completely. Andrew had orchestrated tonight as his grand exit, his declaration of independence from a wife who no longer fit his image of success. What he didn't realize was that he had also freed me from any obligation to protect him, from others, or from himself. My car arrived at the curb, the driver holding the door with professional courtesy. As I settled into the back seat, I opened my calendar app and sent a brief message to my executive team. Meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Subject, Meridian Restructuring. Particular focus on the Director of Strategic Investment position. For the first time in years, I felt the stirring of something I had almost forgotten. Anticipation, edged with a certain satisfaction. Andrew had always been so concerned with optics, with appearances, with how things looked to others. In 14 days, he would learn just how appearances could deceive. The game he thought he had won was only just beginning. The luxury townhouse I returned to that night felt cavernous, in its silence. For 12 years, this carefully curated space had been the backdrop for our marriage, the dinner parties for Andrew's clients, the holiday gatherings, the carefully orchestrated moments that supported the narrative of our perfect life together. Now, walking through the foyer with its gleaming hardwood floors and tasteful artwork, I saw it differently, as the elaborate set of a play that had finally concluded its run. I slipped off my heels and padded to the kitchen, bypassing the living room where framed photos still displayed our smiling faces from happier times. Our wedding in Nantucket, a vacation in Greece, the fundraiser where we'd first met. Each image carefully selected to tell the story Andrew wanted to project. Successful man, beautiful wife, enviable life. The kitchen, at least, felt more like mine. Andrew rarely entered this space except to grab coffee on his way out the door. I poured myself a generous glass of the Pinot Noir he deemed too expensive for everyday drinking, and carried it to my private office at the back of the house. This room, with its sleek desk, dual monitors, and wall of business and finance books, was my sanctuary. Andrew had patronizingly called it my little home office when I'd insisted on having it built 6 years ago. He assumed I used it for household management and perhaps the occasional charity committee work. He had never bothered to ask why I needed enterprise-grade security on my computer system, or why I often took calls behind its closed door. I settled into my chair and unlocked the hidden compartment in my desk drawer, removing a slim folder containing documents I'd hoped never to use. Divorce contingency plans prepared by my private attorney 3 years ago, when Andrew's late nights at the office had first begun. I had suspected then, but chose to look the other way, not out of love, that had begun fading years earlier, but out of strategic patience. The night we met flashed through my mind. The Metropolitan Museum fundraiser, 9 months after I'd quietly founded Blackwell Investments with money from my family's trust and 2 silent partners. I was 27, still establishing myself in the financial world under my professional name, my mother's maiden name, Blackwell, while maintaining a separate social identity. Andrew had been charming that night, attentive in a way few men had been once they learned of my financial background. Most were either intimidated or saw me as a prize to be acquired. Andrew, a rising star at his firm, had seemed different, genuinely interested in my thoughts, amusing me with insider stories about Wall Street's absurdities. When he'd asked what I did, I'd given him the simplified version I used at social functions, family business consulting. It wasn't exactly a lie. My family had been in finance for generations, though my father had nearly destroyed that legacy with a series of disastrous investments before his death. Rebuilding from what remained of our family's assets had been my singular focus since graduating from Penn at 22. Andrew had pursued me relentlessly, and I'd allowed myself to be caught. The marriage made sense at the time. A partner who understood the demands of the financial world but didn't directly compete in my space. Someone who could manage the social aspects of business connections while I built something substantial behind the scenes. I'd never intended to keep Blackwell Investments a secret from him permanently. In those early days, I had imagined eventually bringing him into my confidence, perhaps even into the business once it was established enough to withstand his ego. But something had shifted during our first year of marriage. "You don't need to work, Liv," he'd said when I mentioned possibly taking a part-time consulting position. "Focus on building our home, our social connections. That's more valuable than whatever entry-level position you'd get." I'd recognized it then, the first glimpse of his need to be the provider, the achiever, the center of our universe. So I'd smiled and agreed, all while continuing to build Blackwell through early morning calls, encrypted emails, and charity. Lunch meetings with business associates. As my company grew, acquiring other investment firms, including Meridian Financial 3 years ago, so did Andrew's resentment toward what he perceived as my contentment with being just a wife. The more successful he became, the more he seemed to need me to be less ambitious, less independent, less myself. "You've become boring, Olivia," he told me 4 months ago after a dinner party. "All you talk about is household renovations and that book club of yours. My colleagues' wives at least have interesting careers. The irony had been almost painful. That same day, I'd closed a $350 million acquisition that made headlines in the financial press under the name Olivia Blackwell. Of course, the fictional book club had been my cover for the board meeting. I took another sip of wine, the full weight of his betrayal settling over me. Not just the affair I'd suspected for months, but the calculated humiliation of tonight. He hadn't just wanted to leave me. He'd wanted to destroy me publicly, to position himself as the ambitious success story moving on from his holding him back wife. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my COO and one of the few people who knew both sides of my life. Everything, in motion for Monday. Security team briefed. Legal standing by. You okay? I typed back. Never better. Prepare the Prescott file too. William Prescott had been one of my earliest supporters when I'd founded Blackwell Investments. He'd recognized my potential, when many others saw only a young woman playing at business with her family's money. When I'd acquired Meridian through a holding company 3 years ago, he'd agreed to stay on as the public face of leadership, protecting my privacy while I operated as the unseen CEO. Only a handful of people knew that Olivia Blackwell and Olivia Wilson were the same person. The separation had been necessary in the beginning. A woman in her 20s trying to be taken seriously in the male-dominated world of high finance needed every advantage. The dual identity had eventually become a strategic asset, allowing me to move between worlds, hearing things that would never be said if people knew who I really was. Andrew had benefited from this arrangement more than he knew. How many doors had opened for him because of connections I'd made? How many insights had he gleaned from casual comments I'd made based on information I shouldn't technically have had? He attributed his rapid career advancement to his own brilliance, never once questioning why certain opportunities seemed to fall into his lap at just the right moment. Until 6 months ago, when he'd hit a ceiling at his firm, no further advancement forthcoming, no matter how many hours he put in. His frustration had turned to bitterness, then to wandering eyes, first professionally, then personally. When the opportunity at Meridian had suddenly appeared, he'd seen it as validation of his exceptional talents. He had no idea I'd created the position specifically for him after hearing from mutual friends that his career had stalled, not out of charity, but curiosity. I wanted to see his unfiltered professional capabilities without the advantages my connections had unknowingly provided. I hadn't anticipated Cassandra, but her appearance had simply accelerated a process already in motion. I closed the folder and returned it to its hiding place. The divorce would proceed, but not until after the leadership retreat. Andrew deserved the full experience of understanding exactly what he had thrown away. Not just a wife, but a business partner whose influence far exceeded anything he had imagined. Our courtship had been a whirlwind by design. Andrew's design. Looking back now, I could see the calculated efficiency with which he'd pursued me. We met in April at the Metropolitan Museum fundraiser. By July, he'd proposed on a weekend trip to Martha's Vineyard. By December, we were married in a tasteful ceremony on Nantucket, surrounded by Boston's financial elite, many of whom attended only because of my family name, though Andrew had assumed it was his professional connections that had filled the church. During those early months, I'd been genuinely captivated, not by Andrew himself, but by the possibility he represented. Here was a man who seemed to understand ambition, who spoke the language of finance fluently, who could potentially be a true partner in all senses of the word. Our first year of marriage had been not happy exactly, but harmonious. We moved easily in each other's orbits, two ambitious professionals building something together, except he didn't know I was still building my company instead of just our shared life. The warning signs appeared gradually, so subtle I nearly missed them. There was the dinner party 6 months into our marriage, where Andrew interrupted me repeatedly as I discussed market trends with his managing director. eventually steering the conversation toward his own recent success with a difficult client. There was the way he began critiquing my clothing choices, suggesting more appropriate attire for a financial executive's wife, less bold, more supportive backdrop. There was his reaction when my college friend Megan launched her tech startup and made the cover of Boston Business Review. "She'll burn. Out in a year," he'd predicted. Women like that always do. Too aggressive, not enough strategic patience. The contempt in his voice had been palpable. I began testing his responses, floating hypothetical scenarios about my own career ambitions. "What would you think if I went back to work?" I'd asked once, 3 years into our marriage. "Maybe an investment. Consulting or wealth management?" "Why would you want to start at the bottom now?" he'd replied, genuinely perplexed. "You'd be competing with 22-year-olds willing to work 80-hour weeks. Besides, my career is taking off. We need you, managing the home front." What he meant was, he needed me in a supporting role, not pursuing my own spotlight. So I created an elaborate fiction. The devoted corporate wife who organized charity committees, maintained our social connections, and occasionally consulted on small family business matters. Meanwhile, before he woke each morning and after he networked each evening, I built Blackwell Investments into a powerhouse that eventually acquired Meridian Financial, among other firms. For years, this arrangement worked. Andrew's career flourished, helped by my invisible hand guiding opportunities his way, while my business grew in the shadows. We existed in parallel universes that occasionally intersected at dinner parties and charity functions, where I played my part with Oscar-worthy precision. 5 years into our marriage, the first major crack appeared. Andrew was passed over for partnership at his firm. He came home furious, raging against office politics and the mediocre minds who failed to recognize his talents. I comforted him appropriately, validating his frustration while subtly suggesting alternative approaches. What I didn't tell him was that I knew exactly why he'd been passed over. William Prescott, yes, the same William who now worked for me at Meridian, had been on the selection committee at Andrew's firm back then. He'd shared with me, in strictest confidence during one of our early investment meetings, that Andrew's technical skills were impressive, but his interpersonal approach was problematic. "He takes credit for collaborative work," William had explained. "Creates unnecessary competition between team members. Several key clients have specifically requested not to work with him again." Instead of sharing this invaluable feedback with my husband, I'd protected his ego and quietly helped orchestrate his move to a different firm where his aggressive style might be better tolerated. The pattern repeated through several job changes. Over the years, Andrew advancing rapidly, then hitting a ceiling, then moving laterally with my unseen assistance, always believing it was his exceptional talent that opened doors. Meanwhile, my own professional accomplishments accumulated in my separate life as Olivia Blackwell. I expanded from single-family wealth management into institutional investments, then strategic acquisitions, building a team of brilliant financial minds who respected my leadership and shared my vision. When the opportunity arose 3 years ago to acquire Meridian Financial, a respected but undervalued regional investment firm with excellent client relationships but outdated technology and risk assessment models, I moved decisively. Within months, we'd modernized their systems, streamlined their investment strategies, and doubled their client retention rate, all while Andrew believed I was redecorating our house and running a fictional book club. The distance between us grew, proportionally to my success, not because I pulled away, but because maintaining the elaborate deception required increasingly complex compartmentalization. How could I share my day with him when my actual day involved negotiating 9-figure deals and making decisions affecting hundreds of employees? Instead, our conversations became superficial, focused on his career challenges, social obligations, and household matters. The emotional intimacy that might have existed early in our marriage withered from lack of authentic engagement. I often wondered during those middle years if I should simply tell him the truth, reveal myself as the financial powerhouse I'd become, and invite him to be a genuine partner in my success. But each time the opportunity arose, something in his behavior stopped me. A dismissive comment about a female executive, a self-aggrandizing story that minimized others' contributions, a casual remark revealing his need to be the primary achiever in any relationship. Gradually, our marriage transformed into a business arrangement of sorts. He received the social benefits of a supportive, intelligent wife who enhanced his professional image, while I maintained the cover of conventional marriage that allowed me to build my company without the additional challenges that came with being young, female, and visibly successful in finance. It might have continued indefinitely if Andrew hadn't grown restless, hadn't convinced himself he deserved more, hadn't found Cassandra with her strategic admiration and willingness to play the upgraded version of the role I'd apparently failed to perform to his satisfaction. His betrayal hurt, certainly. 12 years of shared history couldn't be erased overnight. But what truly infuriated me was his assumption that I would quietly accept my dismissal, retreating into invisibility while he paraded his new life with Cassandra. He had no idea who he was actually dealing with. And in 14 days, at the Meridian Financial Leadership Retreat, he would finally learn. I finished my wine and moved through the house, systematically removing photos of Andrew and me together, placing them in a box that I stored in the guest room closet. Not out of sentimentality, but evidence preservation. My attorney had been clear about documenting the history of our marriage. In our bedroom, his side of the closet was already half empty. I noticed several of his favorite suits missing, along with his weekend bag and the vintage cufflinks I'd given him on our 5th anniversary. The swift execution of his exit plan suggested he'd been preparing for this moment for some time, perhaps as long as I'd been preparing for mine. I changed into silk pajamas and performed my nightly routine with mechanical precision. Tomorrow would require perfect focus and energy. Tonight's humiliation had been Andrew's opening move in what he thought was his endgame. He had no idea we were playing entirely different games. As I slid between the sheets, my phone buzzed with a message from Charlotte Prescott. William told me everything after dinner. Your secret has been safe with us for years, and still is. But if there's anything you need this week, anything at all, we're here. What Andrew did tonight was unforgivable. I smiled slightly at the unexpected alliance. Charlotte had always been perceptive. Thank you. Just be sure to capture his face at the retreat when the truth comes out. Consider it an anniversary gift to replace the one I didn't get tonight. I set my alarm for 5 a.m., my usual wake-up time that Andrew had never once questioned, assuming I spent my mornings on household management before he arose at 7. Tomorrow would mark the first day of Andrew's reckoning, though he wouldn't know it yet. The company-wide email introducing Olivia Blackwell as the returning CEO of Meridian Financial wouldn't name me directly or include a photo. That reveal would wait for the retreat, but it would set the stage for what was to come. As I drifted toward sleep, I found myself not angry but curiously liberated. For years, I had maintained the charade of being just Andrew's wife, dimming my own light to keep peace in our marriage. That necessity had now evaporated with the last of his champagne toast to his upgrade. On Monday, I would step fully into the power I had built over the past decade, and in 14 days, Andrew would discover exactly who he had discarded so carelessly. Sometimes, an ending is just the beginning you never saw coming. Dawn arrived with the particular clarity that follows, a night of life-altering decisions. I woke before my alarm, the pale light of early morning filtering through the curtains I'd selected years ago to complement Andrew's preference for sleeping late on weekends. Today, their subtle pattern seemed like just another small compromise in a marriage built on them. I moved through my morning routine with practiced efficiency, shower, hair, makeup applied with the precision of armor. Today I selected a navy Armani suit I'd never worn at home, part of my Olivia Blackwell wardrobe that hung in a separate closet in my downtown office. The sharp tailoring and subtle power it conveyed belonged to the CEO persona I'd maintained, separate from my marriage for a decade. Standing before the full-length mirror, I barely recognized the reflection staring back at me. Not because of the suit, I wore similar attire daily at my actual office, but because of the expression on my face. Gone was the careful mask of a supportive wife, the pleasant half-smile I'd perfected for Andrew's business functions. In its place was something harder, clearer, the face of a woman who had finally stopped pretending. "Who are you?" I whispered to my reflection, genuinely curious. For so long, I'd compartmentalized my life. Olivia Wilson at home, Olivia Blackwell, in the boardroom, that I'd sometimes lost track of where the performance ended and my authentic self began. Last night's humiliation had torn down that dividing wall. The careful separation I'd maintained between my personal and professional lives had served its purpose, but Andrew had shattered that arrangement with his public cruelty. Now, the woman in the mirror was neither purely Olivia Wilson nor Olivia Blackwell, but something new emerging from both, integrated, undivided, and dangerously clear-eyed. I made coffee in the kitchen, noticing Andrew hadn't returned home last night. His toothbrush was gone from our bathroom, as were several suits from his closet. The quiet of the kitchen was interrupted by a text message alert. Cassandra's perfectly made-up face appeared on my phone screen. A social media notification. She'd posted a photo of herself and Andrew from last night. His arm around her waist, champagne glasses raised in a toast. The caption read, "New beginnings with this incredible man. Some people climb the ladder, others are the ladder. So blessed to be with someone who knows the difference. Power couple. Moving up." I stared at the image, noting the calculated angle that showcased her diamond bracelet, identical to the one I'd almost given Andrew last night. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was already playing the role of an ambitious man's supportive partner, positioning herself as both trophy and asset to his career, a role I had played myself, though with a dramatically different endgame in mind. The photo ignited something deeper than anger, a profound weariness with the entire charade. How exhausting it had been maintaining the fiction of the devoted corporate wife while building something significant in the shadows. How many parties had I hosted? How many conversations had I carefully modulated? How many of my own accomplishments had I downplayed to protect Andrew's fragile ego? I closed the social media app and opened my secure email instead. 3 messages from my executive team awaited response, along with a confidential brief on Andrew's professional history compiled by our HR department when he'd applied for the director position. I had reviewed it before approving his hire, of course, but now I studied it with fresh eyes, seeing the careful embellishments, the strategic omissions, the polished narrative of success that didn't quite align with his actual accomplishments. Andrew was good at what he did. I wouldn't have created a position for him otherwise, but not nearly as exceptional as he believed himself to be. His true talent lay in self-promotion, in creating the impression of indispensability while carefully managing upward. It had worked throughout his career, and he'd assumed it would work at Meridian as well. What he couldn't have known was that I had been watching his playbook for years, recognizing each move for exactly what it was. The careful cultivation of allies just senior enough to be useful, the strategic undermining of potential rivals through seemingly casual comments, the taking of credit for collaborative successes, while distancing himself from failures. I had never called him out on these tactics, partly because they weren't directed at me, and partly because observing them had made me a better executive. Andrew had been my unwitting masterclass in corporate politics, teaching me to recognize manipulation in my own organization and guard against it. Now, sipping coffee in the kitchen that had been the setting for so many performances of domestic harmony, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge what I had known subconsciously for years. Our marriage had been a transaction from the beginning. Andrew had wanted a wife who enhanced his professional image, attractive, socially adept, from a good family. I had wanted the cover of convention, a socially acceptable explanation for my frequent absences and early mornings as I built my company. For years, it had been a mutually beneficial arrangement. Only when Andrew began to see me as a limitation rather than an asset had the balance shifted. His growing resentment of what he perceived as my lack of ambition, the very fiction I had maintained to protect his ego, had been the first sign that our unspoken contract was fraying. Last night had been his notice of termination, delivered with calculated cruelty meant to establish his dominance in our new dynamic. He expected me to retreat wounded and diminished, perhaps begging for reconciliation or at least a dignified divorce settlement. The public humiliation had been designed to establish the narrative from the beginning. Ambitious man moves on from holding him back wife to upgrading to trophy girlfriend who understands his drive. I set down my coffee cup and moved to the window, watching the early morning light illuminate the carefully tended garden behind our home. The property had been purchased with my money, though Andrew believed we'd secured the favorable mortgage through his banking connections. The garden had been designed by a landscape architect he'd insisted we needed to impress his managing director during a summer barbecue 3 years ago. How many aspects of our life together had been constructed as backdrop for his ambitions? And how willingly had I accommodated them while pursuing my own hidden agenda? The realization brought no satisfaction, only a clarifying sadness. We had used each other, certainly, but I had never sought to harm him. Even now, preparing to reveal myself as his ultimate boss, my intention wasn't revenge, but simply the removal of a mask that no longer served any purpose. My phone rang, Marcus calling for our morning briefing before the executive team meeting. "Good morning, Olivia," he said, using my professional name. "Are you coming into the office today?" "Yes," I replied, making a final decision. "It's time to consolidate operations, have security clear out the downtown apartment this afternoon. I'll be working from home going forward." The downtown apartment had been my refuge for years. The place where I transformed from Olivia Wilson, corporate wife, into Olivia Blackwell, CEO. Its necessity had ended last night. "Understood," Marcus replied, his tone professional but concerned. "And Andrew, how are you handling that situation?" I considered the question, weighing my personal hurt against my professional responsibilities. "Exactly according to corporate policy," I said finally. "He'll be evaluated on his performance alone, starting today. No special treatment, positive or negative. And the leadership retreat next week proceeds as planned. I'll reveal my identity at the beginning of the first session. Make sure William is prepared to manage the fallout." After ending the call, I gathered my things: laptop, portfolio, the small overnight bag I kept packed for unexpected business trips. As I prepared to leave the house, I paused at the entryway table where a silver-framed photo still stood. Andrew. And me on our wedding day, my smile radiant and genuine. I had believed then that our marriage could eventually bridge the divide between my personal and professional lives, that the man I had chosen would be strong enough to celebrate my success, rather than feel diminished by it. I was wrong. I placed the photo face down and walked out the door, locking it behind me. The woman who had left this house yesterday evening, the perfect corporate wife with her anniversary gift and careful makeup, would not be returning. In her place stood someone new, someone who had finally stopped compartmentalizing her power. Slid into the driver's seat of my car, not the sensible luxury sedan Andrew believed I drove, but the high-performance Tesla I actually preferred. I felt a sudden, unexpected sense of freedom. The weight of maintaining dual identities had been heavier than I'd realized. Now, as I navigated the morning traffic toward Meridian's headquarters, I felt lighter, sharper, more fully myself than I had in years. Andrew had orchestrated last night as my ending. He had no idea it was actually his beginning, the start of discovering exactly who he had been married to all these years and what she was capable of. The Meridian Financial Building stood 35 stories above Boston's financial district, its glass facade reflecting the morning sunlight. I'd purchased the property 4 years ago through one of my holding companies, another investment Andrew had never questioned despite its prominence in the financial district. Like so many aspects of my life, it had existed in plain sight yet remained invisible to him because it didn't align with his perception of who I was. Security greeted me with respectful nods as I crossed the marble lobby. "Good morning, Ms. Blackwell." The private elevator reserved for executive leadership opened with a discreet chime, its operator smiling in recognition. "Welcome back, ma'am. The team is assembled in the boardroom." "Thank you, Richard. How's your son doing at Northwestern?" He beamed with paternal pride. "Dean's List again. That scholarship program you established made all the difference." These small human connections, knowing my employees, their families, their aspirations, had always been a core aspect of my leadership philosophy. While Andrew networked strategically, cultivating only relationships that offered clear advancement, I built genuine connections throughout every level of my organization. The loyalty this engendered couldn't be purchased or demanded, a lesson Andrew had never learned. The executive floor was already humming with activity despite the early hour. My administrative director, Elena, intercepted me before I reached the boardroom, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. "The company-wide email is drafted for your approval," she said, falling into step beside me, "and your office has been prepared. Will you be taking meetings as Olivia Blackwell, or—" She hesitated, aware of my dual identity but unsure of my intentions going forward. "As myself," I replied simply. "Just myself. The distinction ends today." She nodded, professional as always, though I caught the flicker of relief in her eyes. Maintaining my separate identities had complicated operations for my inner circle, requiring elaborate scheduling arrangements and careful communication protocols. And Mr. Wilson's orientation? He's scheduled to meet with the investment strategy team at 10. I paused, considering. "Proceed as planned. No special treatment." "Understood. And if he should happen to come to the executive floor?" "He won't," I said with certainty. "Andrew never investigates what he believes he already understands. He'll be focused on impressing his direct reports today, not exploring the executive hierarchy." The boardroom fell silent as I entered, 12 faces turning toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. My executive team, the carefully selected leaders who had helped build Meridian into what it was today, were among the few who knew both aspects of my life. Marcus rose from his chair at the far end of the table. "Good morning, everyone. As you've likely heard, we're navigating an unusual situation." He glanced at me, silently offering the floor. I set my portfolio on the polished table and remained standing, wanting the clarity of this moment to be absolute. "Last night, my husband publicly ended our marriage," I said, my voice steady. "He's recently been hired as Meridian's new director of strategic investment, a position he believes reports to a CEO he has yet to meet." A ripple of uncomfortable recognition moved through the room. "That meeting is scheduled for the leadership retreat next week. Until then, we will proceed with absolute professionalism." William Prescott, seated to my right, cleared his throat. "To be clear, you want us to treat him exactly as we would any new executive? No indication of his personal connection?" "Precisely," I confirmed. "Andrew will be evaluated solely on his professional merits. His personal choices are irrelevant to his performance here." "And when will he discovers your position?" This from Janet Levine, our sharp general counsel, already anticipating potential legal complications. "He'll be given the same options as any executive in his position. Adapt to the organizational structure or seek opportunities elsewhere." I surveyed the faces around the table, reading the unasked questions in their expressions. I understand this creates an unusual dynamic. To address the obvious concern, My personal situation will not influence company decisions. Andrew was hired because he has valuable skills our investment strategy team needs. That hasn't changed. What remained unspoken but understood by everyone in the room was that Andrew would now have to succeed or fail entirely on his own merits, without the invisible advantages my connections had previously provided. The playing field hadn't been tilted against him. It had simply been leveled. Now, I continued, shifting to business mode, let's discuss the Harrington merger. Marcus, where do we stand with regulatory approval? The meeting proceeded efficiently, covering quarterly projections, strategic initiatives, and pressing operational concerns. Throughout the discussion, I felt a growing sense of integration, the artificial barrier between my personal and professional identities dissolving with each minute. This was who I had always been, decisive, strategic, engaged with both the human and financial aspects of business. The performance had been my role as Andrew's wife, not my role as CEO. As the meeting concluded and executives filed out, William lingered behind. "I've watched you build this company for 10 years, he said once we were alone. Seen you navigate market crashes, regulatory challenges, and attempted hostile takeovers without breaking stride. But I've never seen you like this." "Like what?" I asked, gathering my notes. "Fully present," he replied. "There's always been a part of you held in, reserve, watching the exits. Now," he gestured vaguely, "it's like seeing you in complete focus for the first time." His observation startled me with its accuracy. I had always maintained a certain distance, not just from Andrew, but from everyone in my life. The necessity of maintaining separate identities had created a habit of partial presence, of keeping something held back. "Last night changed things," I acknowledged. "When someone tries to publicly diminish you, it clarifies what you're no longer willing to diminish in yourself." William nodded thoughtfully. "For what it's worth, Charlotte and I always hoped you'd eventually find a partner who could celebrate what you've built, not compete with it." Andrew seemed, he paused, choosing his words carefully, more concerned with being seen as successful than with creating actual value. The assessment was both kind and devastatingly accurate. Andrew had pursued the trappings of success, the prestigious address, the social connections, the beautiful wife, while I had focused on building something of lasting significance. Our fundamental values had always been misaligned, a reality I had ignored for the sake of convenience and convention. "What will you do after the retreat?" William asked. "Once everything is in the open?" I considered the question, realizing I hadn't thought beyond the revelation itself. "Rebuild," I said, finally. But this time without dividing myself in half to make it work. After William left, I walked to the window of the empty boardroom, gazing out at the Boston skyline. From 35 stories up, the city appeared as a living organism, each building, street, and moving vehicle part of an interconnected system. I had always viewed my life similarly, as a complex network of relationships, obligations, and strategic positions that required constant management. What would it mean to simplify that system? To no longer navigate between Olivia Wilson and Olivia Blackwell, wife and CEO, supportive partner and industry leader. My phone vibrated with an incoming text from Andrew. I hadn't expected to hear from him so soon. "Movers coming for my things. Tomorrow. Sign the papers when they arrive, and this can be civilized. Don't make it difficult, Olivia." The breathtaking presumption of it, the assumption that I would simply comply with his demands, sign whatever papers he presented, accommodate his timeline for dismantling our marriage, sparked something between amusement and indignation. For a moment, I imagined responding with the truth. "I'm your boss now, Andrew." "Perhaps you should reconsider your tone." Instead, I simply wrote, "No papers will be signed tomorrow. My attorney will be in touch regarding an equitable settlement." His response came seconds later. "Don't play games you're not equipped for." I smiled. At the irony, slipping the phone back into my pocket without replying. Andrew had always underestimated me. It was the foundation upon which our entire relationship had been built. His certainty that I was not equipped for conflict had allowed me to build an empire while he watched me arrange flowers for his office. Parties. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Elena entered with a tablet in hand. "The company-wide email is ready for your approval," she said, offering me the device. "We'll send it at 9 a.m. if you're satisfied with the wording." I reviewed the message, a straightforward announcement that Olivia Blackwell, CEO and majority owner of Meridian Financial, would be returning from extended international work to resume direct leadership of domestic operations. The language was professional and unremarkable, noting that I would be formally introduced to the entire executive team at next week's leadership retreat. No photo was included, no personal details offered, nothing that would alert Andrew to the storm approaching on his horizon. The ordinary corporate announcement contained not a hint of the extraordinary revelation it presaged. "Send it," I said, handing back the tablet. "And please have my office prepared for the meeting with the investment committee at 11. At precisely 9 UC a.m., the company-wide email went out to every Meridian employee, including the newly hired director of strategic investment. Andrew Wood read it with the casual disinterest he afforded all corporate communications that didn't directly involve him. He might note the CEO's name without recognition, might even mentally prepare some strategy for impressing Olivia Blackwell when they eventually met. What he couldn't possibly prepare for was the moment 14 days from now when he would walk into the leadership retreat and discover that the wife he had so publicly discarded and the boss he so desperately needed to impress were one and the same. Straightened my shoulders and turned from the window, ready to reclaim the boardroom. Not as someone's wife, but as exactly who I was. The woman who owned the company, the building, and as of last night, her complete self. Andrew had introduced his upgrade to the world yesterday. In 2 weeks, I would finally introduce mine. The week following my anniversary passed in a carefully orchestrated dance of avoidance and preparation. Andrew made no attempt to return to the townhouse, communicating exclusively through increasingly terse text messages about property division and settlement terms. Each message carried the unmistakable assumption that I would acquiesce to his demands without question, an assumption I allowed him to maintain for now. At Meridian, I operated mostly from my private office on the executive floor, a space unknown to the majority of employees. The company-wide email announcing my return had generated the expected buzz of curiosity, but without a photo or detailed biography, most employees, including Andrew, had no reason to connect Olivia Blackwell with Olivia Wilson. By Thursday, I had established a new rhythm, integrating my previously divided life into a single coherent identity. The relief of no longer maintaining separate wardrobes, schedules, and personas was profound. Like setting down a heavy burden I'd carried for so long, I'd forgotten its weight. It was in this state of newfound clarity that I encountered Andrew, for the first time since our anniversary dinner. I had just concluded a meeting with our investment committee when I spotted him in the main corridor of the 27th floor, deep in conversation with 2 members of his investment strategy team. He hadn't seen me yet, giving me a moment to observe him unnoticed. He looked exactly as he always did in professional settings, impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, his posture conveying casual confidence, one hand gesturing emphatically to underscore whatever point he was making. I recognized the performance instantly. Andrew at his most charming, establishing dominance through selective expertise and carefully calibrated charisma. For a moment, I considered simply turning down another hallway to avoid the encounter. The leadership retreat was only 10 days away. There was no strategic advantage in confronting him now. But something in me rebelled against the idea of altering my path to accommodate his presence. Another small adjustment in a decade of such adjustments. Instead, I continued walking directly toward the group, my heels clicking purposefully against the marble floor. The sound drew the attention of one of the investment analysts, a young woman named Rachel who had recently been promoted. Her eyes widened slightly in recognition. She had attended several executive briefings and knew exactly who I was. "Ms. Blackwell," she said, her voice carrying enough to cause Andrew to turn. "I wasn't aware you were back in Boston." Andrew's expression shifted from mild irritation at the interruption to professional interest as he assessed me. A woman he didn't recognize being addressed with obvious deference by his subordinate. I watched the calculation in his eyes, the quick determination that I must be someone worth impressing. "Just returned this week," I replied to Rachel with a warm smile, then turned to Andrew with professional courtesy. "You must be Andrew Wilson, our new Director of Strategic Investment." His eyes registered a brief surprise that I knew who he was, quickly replaced by the practiced charm he deployed for networking opportunities. "I am indeed," he confirmed, extending his hand. "And you are?" "Olivia Blackwell," I said, accepting, his handshake with firm precision. "I work closely with the executive team on strategic initiatives." His handshake lingered a moment longer than necessary, an old habit I recognized from countless business functions. Andrew had always been tactile when networking, creating an illusion of immediate connection through physical contact. "Strategic initiatives," he repeated, his tone suggesting both interest and a subtle attempt to place me within the corporate hierarchy. "That sounds intriguing vague." "The best kinds of strategies often are," I replied with a professional smile, noting how he subtly positioned himself to command the space between us, angling his body to establish dominance in the conversation. It was fascinating to observe his tactics from this new perspective, as a potential business connection rather than his wife. "Ms. Blackwell has been reviewing your team's preliminary work on the Harrington acquisition," Rachel offered, clearly, trying to highlight her boss's contributions. "I've been refining the approach," Andrew added smoothly. "The previous analysis missed several key opportunities for post-merger synergies. I've identified at least 3 areas where we could increase projected returns by nearly 15%. The confidence with which he critiqued work he had barely begun to understand was quintessential Andrew. Bold assertions designed to establish expertise regardless of whether they were fully supported by facts. In our marriage, I often nodded along with such pronouncements. Now I felt no such obligation. "Interesting," I said, my tone neutral. "The Harrington analysis was actually my project. I'd be curious to hear specifically which synergies you believe were overlooked." A flash of uncertainty crossed his face, quickly masked by renewed confidence. "Of course, I'd be happy to walk you through my thoughts. Perhaps over coffee? I'm still getting to know the key players here." The invitation was classic Andrew, turning a potential challenge into a networking opportunity while simultaneously gathering intelligence about a new colleague who might influence his standing. I had watched him deploy this exact tactic countless times at industry events. "Unfortunately, my schedule is quite full before the leadership retreat," I replied. "But I look forward to hearing your detailed analysis there. The Harrington merger will be a central topic of discussion." Andrew's expression shifted subtly. Disappointment at the missed networking opportunity balanced against satisfaction at confirmation that he would be participating in the leadership retreat. A privilege, typically reserved for senior executives. "I've been looking forward to the retreat," he said, his voice lowered conspiratorially. "I understand our mysterious CEO will finally make an appearance. Have you worked with Blackwell long? Any insights on what to expect?" The audacity of it, asking me for insider information about myself, almost made me laugh. I caught Rachel's widening eyes and the slight shake of her head warning Andrew that he was overstepping. "I think it's best if you form your own impressions," I said. "But a word of advice. Come prepared to defend your analysis with substantial data. Unsupported assertions don't go over well." His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. I never make claims I can't back up." The boldness of this lie, spoken directly to someone who had witnessed 12 years of his exaggerations and self-promotion, was breathtaking. In our marriage, I had tactfully overlooked such moments, understanding that his confidence sometimes required gentle maintenance of convenient fictions. Now, I simply met his gaze with calm certainty. "I'm glad to hear it. That will serve you well at Meridian." I nodded politely to the group and continued down the corridor, feeling Andrew's eyes on my back as I walked away. The encounter had been brief but revealing. He had no inkling of my true identity, seeing me only as another potential rung on his professional ladder. My phone vibrated with a text as I reached the elevator. It was from Rachel. Should I be concerned? About what just happened? He's asking me about you now? I smiled slightly, typing back, "Not at all. Tell him whatever you like, except who I actually am." The elevator doors opened, revealing Marcus waiting inside. He raised an eyebrow as I entered. "I just passed Andrew in the corridor," I explained as the doors closed. He was quite interested in learning more about Olivia Blackwell. Marcus's lips quivered in amusement. "And what did you tell him?" "That I look forward to his detailed analysis of the Harrington merger opportunities he claims to have identified." Marcus winced. "That's the project you spent 8 months personally structuring." "The very one," I confirmed. "He believes he's found ways to improve returns by 15% after less than a week on the job." "Bold," Marcus commented. "Or foolhardy." With Andrew, those qualities have always existed in close proximity. As we reached the executive floor, Marcus hesitated before exiting. "Are you sure this is the right approach? Let him continue in ignorance until the retreat?" I considered the question seriously. Andrew thrives on preparation and control. He rehearses important meetings, crafts his image meticulously, plans his strategic responses. Taking away that advantage, having him face this revelation without the opportunity to construct a performance around it, is perhaps the only way to see his authentic professional capabilities. "And personally?" Marcus asked quietly. I stepped out of the elevator, the weight of the question following me. "Personally, this is the consequence of his choices. He wanted to publicly discard our marriage in favor of professional advancement and a partner who understands ambition. He's getting exactly what he claimed to want." Back in my office, I found myself reflecting on the encounter. Andrew had looked straight at me, his wife of 12 years, and seen only a networking opportunity, a potential ally in his campaign to conquer Meridian from within. The complete absence of recognition confirmed what I had long suspected. He had never truly seen me, only the reflection of himself that I had carefully maintained for him. My computer chimed with an incoming email from Andrew Wilson to Olivia Blackwell. I opened it with growing curiosity. "Ms. Blackwell." "Interesting," I said, my tone neutral. "The Harrington analysis was actually my project. I'd be curious to hear specifically which synergies you believe were overlooked." A flash of uncertainty crossed his face, quickly masked by renewed confidence. "Of course, I'd be happy to walk you through my thoughts. Perhaps over coffee? I'm still getting to know the key players here." The invitation was classic Andrew, turning a potential challenge into a networking opportunity while simultaneously gathering intelligence about a new colleague who might influence his standing. I had watched him deploy this exact tactic countless times at industry events. "Unfortunately, my schedule is quite full before the leadership retreat," I replied. "But I look forward to hearing your detailed analysis there. The Harrington merger will be a central topic of discussion." Andrew's expression shifted subtly. Disappointment at the missed networking opportunity balanced against satisfaction at confirmation that he would be participating in the leadership retreat. A privilege typically reserved for senior executives. "I've been looking forward to the retreat," he said, his voice lowered conspiratorially. "I understand our mysterious CEO will finally make an appearance. Have you worked with Blackwell long? Any insights on what to expect?" The audacity of it, asking me for insider information about myself, almost made me laugh. I caught Rachel's widening eyes and the slight shake of her head warning Andrew that he was overstepping. "I think it's best if you form your own impressions," I said. "But a word of advice. Come prepared to defend your analysis with substantial data. Unsupported assertions don't go over well." His smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. I never make claims I can't back up." The boldness of this lie, spoken directly to someone who had witnessed 12 years of his exaggerations and self-promotion, was breathtaking. In our marriage, I had tactfully overlooked such moments, understanding that his confidence sometimes required gentle maintenance of convenient fictions. Now, I simply met his gaze with calm certainty. "I'm glad to hear it. That will serve you well at Meridian." I nodded politely to the group and continued down the corridor, feeling Andrew's eyes on my back as I walked away. The encounter had been brief but revealing. He had no inkling of my true identity, seeing me only as another potential rung on his professional ladder. My phone vibrated with a text as I reached the elevator. It was from Rachel. Should I be concerned? About what just happened? He's asking me about you now? I smiled slightly, typing back, "Not at all. Tell him whatever you like, except who I actually am." The elevator doors opened, revealing Marcus waiting inside. He raised an eyebrow as I entered. "I just passed Andrew in the corridor," I explained as the doors closed. He was quite interested in learning more about Olivia Blackwell. Marcus's lips quivered in amusement. "And what did you tell him?" "That I look forward to his detailed analysis of the Harrington merger opportunities he claims to have identified." Marcus winced. "That's the project you spent 8 months personally structuring." "The very one," I confirmed. "He believes he's found ways to improve returns by 15% after less than a week on the job." "Bold," Marcus commented. "Or foolhardy." With Andrew, those qualities have always existed in close proximity. As we reached the executive floor, Marcus hesitated before exiting. "Are you sure this is the right approach? Let him continue in ignorance until the retreat?" I considered the question seriously. Andrew thrives on preparation and control. He rehearses important meetings, crafts his image meticulously, plans his strategic responses. Taking away that advantage, having him face this revelation without the opportunity to construct a performance around it, is perhaps the only way to see his authentic professional capabilities. "And personally?" Marcus asked quietly. I stepped out of the elevator, the weight of the question following me. "Personally, this is the consequence of his choices. He wanted to publicly discard our marriage in favor of professional advancement and a partner who understands ambition. He's getting exactly what he claimed to want." Back in my office, I found myself reflecting on the encounter. Andrew had looked straight at me, his wife of 12 years, and seen only a networking opportunity, a potential ally in his campaign to conquer Meridian from within. The complete absence of recognition confirmed what I had long suspected. He had never truly seen me, only the reflection of himself that I had carefully maintained for him. My computer chimed with an incoming email from Andrew Wilson to Olivia Blackwell. I opened it with growing curiosity. "Ms. Blackwell, it was a pleasure meeting you this morning. I appreciate your insights regarding the Harrington merger and would welcome the opportunity to discuss my analysis in detail prior to the leadership retreat. While I understand your schedule is busy, even a brief conversation could align our thinking and strengthen Meridian's negotiating position. I've taken the liberty of attaching some preliminary observations based on my review of the situation. Your feedback would be invaluable. Best regards, Andrew Wilson." Director of Strategic Investment. Attached was a 7-page document outlining his strategic enhancements to the Harrington merger approach. I opened it, curiosity overcoming my initial amusement at his persistence. The analysis was not entirely without merit. Andrew had indeed identified several potential improvements to the integration timeline, though his projected 15% return increase was wildly optimistic. More interesting was how he had packaged relatively standard observations as revolutionary insights, a talent for presentation that had served him well throughout his career. What the document revealed most clearly, however, was his fundamental approach, finding ways to claim credit for existing work while positioning himself as the solution to problems that hadn't yet been identified. It was the same strategy he had deployed in our marriage, creating narratives where he was always the hero, the visionary, the indispensable factor for success. I closed the document without replying. Let him wonder whether his overture had been well received. The uncertainty would likely drive him to prepare even more thoroughly for the leadership retreat, which could only benefit Meridian, regardless of what happened afterward. My calendar alert chimed, reminding me of my afternoon meeting with legal counsel regarding the divorce. The juxtaposition was jarring, from reviewing Andrew's professional posturing to discussing the dissolution of our marriage in the space of an hour. As I gathered my materials for the meeting, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number. I answered with professional caution. Olivia Blackwell speaking. Ms. Blackwell. A woman's voice, cool and slightly hesitant. This is Cassandra Matthews. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance. The unexpectedness of it, Andrew's new girlfriend. Calling my professional line momentarily left me speechless. I see, I managed finally. And how did you get this number, Ms. Matthews? Andrew mentioned meeting you today. I did some research. I work in public relations. Finding people is part of my job. The pride in her voice was unmistakable, as was the subtle warning that she had resources and wasn't afraid to use them. How resourceful, I replied neutrally. What can I do for you? I understand you're involved with the leadership team at Meridian, she continued. Andrew is very excited about the retreat next week. I was hoping we might meet for lunch. I always like to know who the key players are in Andrew's professional life. The audacity was almost admirable. Cassandra was deploying the same strategy I had observed countless corporate spouses use over the years, inserting themselves into their partner's professional network, gathering intelligence, creating social connections that could later be leveraged. I'm afraid my schedule doesn't permit social lunches at the moment, I said, and I generally maintain a professional separation between work relationships and personal entanglements. Of course, she replied, her tone cooling further. I just thought, given your position, you might appreciate the broader context of Andrew's situation. He's going through some personal changes that might affect his focus temporarily. The implication was clear. She was attempting to explain away any potential performance issues by referencing his divorce, while simultaneously establishing herself as his spokesperson and defender. Ms. Matthews, I said carefully, let me be very clear. At Way, Meridian Financial, we evaluate our executives solely on their professional performance. Their personal lives, including who they choose to associate with, are entirely their own business, provided they don't impact company operations. I understand completely, she responded, a new edge in her voice. I just wanted to introduce myself since we'll likely be seeing each other at company functions going forward. Andrew speaks very highly of Meridian's potential. Meridian's potential, I repeated mentally, noting the phrasing. Not Meridian's success or Meridian's achievements, but its potential, implying room for improvement that Andrew would presumably provide. Well, thank you for the call, Ms. Matthews. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to meet eventually. I ended the conversation as politely as efficiency allowed, making a mental note to have our security team review our communication protocols. If Cassandra had obtained my direct line, other sensitive information might also be compromised. That call left me with an unsettled feeling I couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't jealousy, Whatever emotional attachment I'd felt toward Andrew had been systematically dismantled by years of his subtle undermining, capped by his public humiliation strategy. Rather, it was the recognition of a pattern being repeated. Cassandra was positioning herself exactly as I had once done, as the supportive partner facilitating Andrew's ambitions. Did she know what that role would cost her over time? The constant modulation of her own aspirations? The careful management of his ego? The strategic deployment of her connections for his benefit? For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Then, I remembered her smirking presence at my anniversary dinner, her deliberate participation in my public humiliation, her calculated comment about women supporting careers versus understanding ambition. She had made her choice with eyes wide open, positioning herself as an upgrade to a wife she believed was inconsequential. In 10 days, both she and Andrew would discover just how profound their miscalculation had been. The week continued with mounting tension as the leadership retreat approached. Andrew sent 3 more emails to Olivia Blackwell, each more carefully crafted than the last, attaching revised analyses, suggesting strategic alignments, offering insights that balanced confidence with just enough deference to avoid appearing presumptuous. I monitored his activities through regular departmental updates. He was working extended hours, driving his team with focused intensity to prepare comprehensive materials for the retreat. His approach to the Harrington merger had evolved considerably from his initial overconfident assessment, incorporating feedback from the investment committee while still maintaining his position as the architect of key improvements. In professional terms, his performance was actually impressive, adaptive, thorough, strategically sound. Had I been merely his CEO with no personal history, I might have been quite pleased with his contributions thus far. But I wasn't merely his CEO, and our personal history colored everything. The divorce proceedings moved forward with mechanical efficiency. My attorney reported that Andrew's legal team had requested an expedited process with surprisingly reasonable terms, a clean break with minimal financial entanglement. This was consistent with his character. Andrew had always preferred swift exits from complicated situations, particularly when a new beginning awaited him. What surprised me was learning that he had scheduled Cassandra to attend the opening dinner. At the leadership retreat, a bold move that blurred professional and personal boundaries in a way that would have been considered inappropriate under normal circumstances. The request had been approved before reaching my desk, as such minor logistical details rarely required CEO involvement. "Do you want me to revoke the approval?" Marcus asked when he discovered it, clearly concerned about the potential for awkwardness. Considered it briefly, then shook my head. "No, let it stand." "You're sure?" "Having his new girlfriend there when you reveal yourself as his wife and CEO seems poetically appropriate," I finished for him. "Besides, it's strategically valuable. His reaction will be more authentic with her present, and authenticity is what we need to evaluate." Marcus looked unconvinced, but nodded. "The Berkshire Mountain Lodge is confirmed. Executive team arrives Friday afternoon. Department heads and directors Saturday morning. First session begins at noon, with your introduction as the opening item." I nodded, visualizing the scene that would unfold. "And the seating arrangement?" "As requested. You'll be at the head of the table, Andrew near the opposite end. Good sightline for the inevitable moment of recognition." "Perfect. And William?" "Positioned to intervene if necessary, though he doesn't anticipate needing to." The final pieces were falling into place. In 3 days, I would step fully into the integrated identity I had been building toward since the anniversary dinner. No more compartmentalization, no more separate personas, just Olivia Blackwell. Wilson, CEO and soon-to-be ex-wife, claiming both roles without apology or diminishment. My phone buzzed with a notification, a social media post from Cassandra, showcasing the designer outfit she'd purchased for the executive leadership retreat. With my amazing man. The photo featured her in an elegant blue dress that complemented Andrew's favorite suit. Both of them posed in front of the Boston skyline, champagne glasses raised in a toast eerily reminiscent of our anniversary dinner scene. Her caption read, "Preparing to meet the Meridian leadership team. So proud of everything A has accomplished in such a short time. Some people talk about making moves, others actually make them. Power couple. Executive life. Watch us rise." I closed the app without reaction. In 3 days, that hashtag would takes on an entirely different meaning. The Berkshire Mountain Lodge stood nestled among towering pines, its rustic luxury providing the perfect setting for Meridian's annual leadership retreat. I arrived Friday afternoon, using the extra time to review my presentation materials and confirm the weekend's arrangements with the event coordinator. The main lodge, with its soaring timber ceilings and massive stone fireplaces, offered a deliberate contrast to Meridian's sleek urban headquarters. Executive team members began arriving throughout the evening, each stopping by my private cabin to check in before settling into their own accommodations scattered around the property. William and Charlotte Prescott joined me for dinner at the main lodge, the three of us choosing a quiet table overlooking the lake. "Everything's prepared for tomorrow," William said carefully, cutting his steak. "Marcus has arranged the seating for the opening session. Andrew will be positioned at the far end of the table, a good sightline for the cameras." I raised an eyebrow. "Cameras?" William's expression remained innocent. "Charlotte insisted we record the opening session for the company archives. Historical significance," she said. I smiled despite myself. Charlotte Prescott's determination to document Andrew's comeuppance was a small but satisfying reminder that I wasn't the only one he had underestimated over the years. "And how is our new director of strategic investment performing?" I asked, turning the conversation to business. William considered the question carefully. "Aggressively competent," he said finally. "He's made quite an impression on his team, working long hours, pushing for faster analysis, positioning himself as the driving force behind the Harrington merger. Has he managed to substantiate those 15% increased returns he promised?" William's lips twitched. "He's walked that back to potential increases of up to 9% depending on implementation timing. Still optimistic, but at least within the realm of theoretical possibility." I nodded, unsurprised. Andrew had always been adept at adjusting his claims when challenged, presenting the revised targets as if they had been his position all along. "And his personal situation?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Quite visible," William replied delicately. "Ms. Matthews has been a frequent visitor to the office, joining him for lunch, bringing by forgotten items. She's quite strategic about establishing her presence." The information aligned with what I had gathered from other sources. Cassandra was deliberately integrating herself into Andrew's professional environment, ensuring everyone recognized her as his chosen partner. It was a calculated approach to personal branding that I might have admired under different circumstances. "The executive team arrives at 10 more tomorrow," William continued. "Andrew is scheduled for 11 hours along with the other department directors. The opening session begins at noon with your formal introduction as the first item on the agenda." I nodded, visualizing the sequence of events that would unfold. "And everyone has been briefed on the protocol?" "Absolute confidentiality until your formal introduction," William confirmed. "Though I must say, keeping this particular secret has generated more anticipation than our last 3 product launches combined." Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the pine forest surrounding the lodge. I dressed with particular care, selecting a tailored navy suit that conveyed authority without ostentation, accessorizing with the simple pearl earrings my grandmother had left me, my only sentimental indulgence. Marcus met me at the main lodge entrance, tablet in hand. "Executive team all present," he reported, walking beside me toward the conference center. "Andrew arrived 20 minutes ago with Ms. Matthews. They're currently on the main deck where he's introducing her to the regional directors. I nodded, making a final adjustment to my suit jacket. Has he asked about Olivia Blackwell? Marcus's lips quirked slightly. Repeatedly. He's been working the room, trying to determine who you are and whether you've arrived yet. Several people have indicated. You're around somewhere but keeping a low profile before the formal introduction. The predictability of Andrew's behavior was almost comforting. Networking aggressively, gathering intelligence, positioning himself advantageously before an important meeting. These were the tactics that had served him well throughout his career. The careful preparations that allowed him to present the polished, confident persona he had cultivated. Today, those preparations would be rendered useless by a single revelation. It's time, Marcus said, checking his watch. William is beginning the welcome now. We moved through the corridor to the conference room's side entrance, pausing just outside the door. Through the small window, I could see William standing at the head of the long table, welcoming the assembled executive team to the retreat. The room was arranged in typical boardroom fashion, a massive oak table surrounded by leather chairs, with William at the head position and 24 executives arrayed along both sides. Andrew sat near the far end, his posture conveying casual confidence, one arm draped over the empty chair beside him, presumably saved for Cassandra, who would join for lunch after the business portion concluded. Even from this distance, I could read his expression. Alert, engaged, but with that hint of calculation I knew so well, mentally mapping the power dynamics in the room. William's voice carried clearly through the door. Extremely pleased to formally introduce our CEO and majority owner, who has returned from an extended period overseeing our international operations to take a more active role in Meridian's domestic strategy. I took a deep breath, centering myself in the moment. This wasn't about Andrew, I reminded myself. This was about stepping fully into the life I had built, claiming the achievement that had always been mine. Please join me in welcoming Olivia Blackwell, William concluded, turning toward the door. Marcus opened it and I walked into the conference room with measured steps. The assembled executives, most of whom had worked with me for years, rose in a wave of practiced professional courtesy. I moved to the head of the table, accepting William's handshake and taking the position he vacated. My eyes found Andrew, immediately, watching as confusion gave way to disbelief on his face. He had half risen with the others, his movement arrested mid-stand as recognition dawned. For 3 breathtaking seconds, his carefully constructed professional mask dissolved, completely, revealing raw, unfiltered shock. "Thank you, William," I said, my voice calm and carrying easily across the silent room. "And thank you all for being here today. For those I haven't yet had the pleasure of working with directly, I'm Olivia Blackwell, CEO and principal owner of Meridian Financial." I paused, allowing my gaze to move deliberately around the table, including each person in the room before finally returning to Andrew, who had managed to complete his rise to standing, though his knuckles were white where they gripped the edge of the table. "Some of you may know me by another name," I continued evenly. "In my personal life, I'm Olivia Wilson." The ripple of reaction through the room was subtle but unmistakable. Those who hadn't known exchanging glances of surprise, those who had watched Andrew with barely concealed interest. To his credit, he maintained his composure, though the color had drained from his face entirely. For the past decade, I've maintained separate professional and personal identities for a variety of reasons, some strategic, some cultural, some simply practical. That separation ends today. I opened my portfolio, signaling a shift to business. Now, let's discuss Meridian's position and our strategies for the coming quarter. The meeting proceeded with professional efficiency, each executive presenting their department updates while I facilitated discussion and provided strategic direction. Throughout the presentation, Andrew remained silent, his earlier networking, confidence replaced by a stillness that bordered on rigidity. I neither avoided him nor singled him out, treating him exactly as I did every other director in the room, with professional courtesy and appropriate attention to his departmental concerns. When the Harrington merger appeared on the agenda, I acknowledged his team's contributions to the analysis without specific reference to our previous interaction. Only once did our eyes meet directly, during Marcus's presentation on organizational structure, when a slide displayed the executive reporting lines with Andrew's position clearly subordinate to both Marcus and me. In that moment of eye contact, I saw something shift in his expression, the shock giving way to calculation as he began processing the full implications of his new reality. As the meeting concluded and executives began gathering their materials, I made a final announcement. Thank you all for your attention today. We'll reconvene after lunch to discuss the Harrington merger in greater detail. Department directors, please ensure your teams have prepared their implementation timelines as previously requested. The room emptied gradually, executives stopping to exchange brief words with me before heading to the dining room for lunch. Andrew remained seated, his eyes fixed on the table before him, clearly wrestling with his next move. When only the two of us remained, he finally looked up, his expression carefully composed into something approaching professional neutrality. I think, he said quietly, we should talk. I closed my portfolio and considered him across the length of the conference table. The man who had publicly discarded me 2 weeks earlier, now reconsidering his position in light of new information. Yes, I agreed, my tone measured. I believe we should. The conference room emptied, leaving Andrew and me alone in a silence heavy with unspoken recriminations. Through the large windows, I could see executives gathering on the lodge's expansive deck, their curious glances occasionally drifting toward the conference room before quickly averting when they realized they might be observed. Andrew remained, seated at the far end of the table, his initial shock now giving way to the careful calculation I recognized from countless negotiations. I made no move to approach him, instead organizing my presentation materials with unhurried precision. Let him come to me, I decided. Let him traverse the physical distance he had created between us. After what seemed like minutes, but was likely only seconds, he stood and walked toward me, each step measured as if approaching an unexploded device. He chose a chair 3 seats away, close enough for private conversation, but maintaining a buffer that spoke volumes about his uncertainty. You're Olivia Blackwell, he said finally, his voice flat with disbelief, despite having had nearly an hour to process this reality. I am, I confirmed simply. For how long? The question came quickly, an edge of accusation beneath the words. I founded Blackwell Investments 13 years ago, shortly before we met. The name Olivia Blackwell comes from my maternal grandmother. His eyes narrowed, processing implications with the rapid calculation that had always made him effective in crisis scenarios. The entire time we were married, you were running a major investment firm without telling me. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes. Why? The single word carried layers of incredulity. Why the secrecy? Why the separate identity? Considered the question carefully, wanting to be precise in my response. Initially, it was a pragmatic business decision. A 27-year-old woman trying to raise capital and be taken seriously in finance faces certain obstacles. Using my mother's maiden name and being deliberately vague about my age helped bypass some of those barriers. And later, he pressed, after we were married, after you established yourself, I met his gaze directly. Later, it became clear that our marriage functioned best when you believed your career was the primary focus of our household. The truth of this statement hit its mark with devastating accuracy. Andrew flinched slightly, then quickly masked the reaction with a scoff. So this was all some elaborate test, setting me up to fail? No, Andrew. This was me building something substantial while simultaneously maintaining the fiction that seemed necessary for our marriage to function. You never asked about my charity work or book club meetings. You never questioned why I needed a dedicated home office with enterprise-grade security. You simply assumed I was occupied with activities that posed no threat to your self-image. He leaned back, his expression hardening. And my position here, was that part of your plan all along? Hiring your soon-to-be ex-husband without disclosing your relationship? You were hired because your qualifications matched what Meridian needed, I replied evenly. The position was created based on legitimate business requirements. Your application was evaluated by HR and the investment strategy team before reaching my desk. I simply approved their recommendation. How generous of you, he said, sarcasm edging his tone. And were you planning to disclose your identity before or after the divorce was finalized? Today was always the plan. Leadership retreats have traditionally been when Meridian executives meet the CEO. The timing of our personal situation accelerated nothing. Andrew stood abruptly, pacing alongside the conference table. The controlled movement was familiar. His way of managing frustration when a negotiation wasn't proceeding as anticipated. I remained seated, watching his process unfold exactly as it always did. Initial disbelief, searching for leverage, recalculating his position. You've made me look like a fool, he said finally, turning to face me. In front of the entire executive team. No, Andrew, I corrected quietly. You did that yourself when you introduced your upgrade at our anniversary dinner. The reference to that night hit him like a physical blow, cutting through his professional indignation to the personal betrayal beneath. For a moment, genuine emotion broke through his careful facade. A flash of shame quickly suppressed. That was personal, he said dismissively. This is business. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, you've made our personal situation very much a business matter by bringing Cassandra to this retreat. She's waiting for you right now, isn't she? Ready to play the supportive partner role at the welcome lunch. His jaw tightened. Cassandra has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this, I countered. You positioned her as my replacement, Andrew, as an upgrade who understands ambition in ways I supposedly don't. You made claims about me, about my capabilities and aspirations that were fundamentally false, and you did so publicly, with deliberate cruelty. I didn't know, he insisted, his voice rising slightly. How could I possibly have known who you really were? That's exactly the point, I said, my calm unbroken. You never asked. In 12 years of marriage, you never once looked beyond the carefully curated image you had of me, the supportive wife who existed to advance your ambitions. Even when evidence contradicted that image, you dismissed it rather than questioning your assumptions. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I had seen countless times during our marriage. So what now? You're my boss? I'm your subordinate? And we're getting divorced? Is this your idea of a professional? Of appropriate corporate governance? The attempt to shift from personal accountability to corporate ethics was predictable, moving the battlefield to terrain where he felt more confident. Your position reports to Marcus Davis, the COO, I stated factually. While I understand the unusual nature of this situation, there is no direct reporting relationship between us. The board has been fully briefed on the circumstances and approved temporary governance adjustments to manage any potential conflicts. You've thought of everything, he said, bitterness edging his words. That's literally my job, I replied simply. Just as it's been for the past decade, while you believed I was planning dinner parties and charity auctions. Andrew paced to the window, staring out at the assembled executives on the deck. From his vantage point, he could undoubtedly see Cassandra among them, attempting to network while processing the sudden dramatic shift in her strategic position. She's going to leave me, he said suddenly, the words seemingly emerging without his permission. The unexpected vulnerability of the statement caught me off guard. Not once in our decade of marriage had Andrew admitted the fear of abandonment that drove so many of his actions. Cassandra, I asked, though I knew exactly who he meant. Your professional identity has always been built on being exceptional, I continued. The star performer, the indispensable talent. the one moving fastest up the ladder. My success threatened that narrative, so I kept it separate to preserve both my company and our marriage. And now? He asked, his voice subdued. What? The endgame here. Professionally, you do your job, I do mine. And Meridian benefits from both our talents. Personally? He spread his hands in a gesture of finality. That book is closed, Andrew. You made that decision very publicly 2 weeks ago. His expression hardened. So this was revenge? Making me look foolish in front of the entire executive team? No, I corrected firmly. This was scheduled months ago, before you ever interviewed for the position. Your timing with Cassandra created this particular scenario, not mine. A knock at the conference room door interrupted whatever response he might have made. Marcus entered with a deliberate lack of haste, his expression professionally neutral despite the obvious tension in the room. Excuse me, he said. The lunch service is beginning, and several executives have questions about the afternoon session. Thank you, Marcus, I replied, gathering my materials. I'll join them momentarily. Andrew straightened, adjusting his tie in an unconscious gesture of composure. And Ms. Matthews? He asked. She's still at the retreat as my guest. I considered this briefly. That's your decision. If you feel her presence is appropriate under the circumstances, she's welcome to stay. The subtle challenge in my words wasn't lost on him. Having Cassandra remain would force him to navigate the introduction of his upgrade to his newly revealed boss wife, a social complexity that would test even his considerable interpersonal skills. I think, he said carefully, it might be best if she returned to the city this afternoon. I nodded without comment, neither approving nor questioning his choice. As I moved toward the door, Andrew's voice stopped me. What was real? He asked. The question bare of pretense for perhaps the first time in our relationship. In our marriage, was any of it genuine? I turned back, finding unexpected honesty in his expression. For a moment, the calculated networker and status-seeking executive were gone, leaving only the man I had once believed I could build a life with. My hope was real, I said quietly. My belief that eventually we could be true partners. That you would become secure enough in your own achievements to celebrate mine. That hope faded gradually, replaced by the pragmatic recognition that our marriage worked precisely because you didn't know who I really was. He absorbed this with a slight nod, neither accepting nor rejecting the assessment. And now everyone knows. Yes, I agreed. Now everyone knows. As I left the conference room, I felt the weight of his gaze following me, not with anger or calculation now, but with something closer to genuine reckoning. For perhaps the first time, Andrew was seeing me clearly, without the distorting lens of his own needs and assumptions. Outside, the executive team waited on the lodge deck, conversations pausing briefly as I emerged. Among them stood Cassandra, her confident posture now uncertain, her networking smile faltering as she registered the gravity of conversations happening around her. William approached, offering a glass of sparkling water with a subtle nod of support. Everything. All right? He asked quietly. Professional boundaries established, I replied, matching his discretion. Personal consequences acknowledged. William's eyes moved past me to where Andrew now exited the conference room, his expression carefully, composed into professional neutrality despite the seismic shift in his circumstances. And Mr. Wilson? William asked. I watched as Andrew made his way directly to Cassandra, bending to speak quietly in her ear. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, her eyes darting to me with sudden recognition. Making difficult decisions, I observed, about what kind of man he wants to be going forward. The afternoon sessions proceeded with professional efficiency, though an undercurrent of fascination rippled through every presentation. Executives who had known my dual identity for years maintained admirable composure, while those newly informed struggled to reconcile the revelation with their previous understanding of corporate hierarchy. Andrew remained for the afternoon sessions, his contributions carefully measured and strictly professional. If executives were watching for signs of personal distress or resentment, he provided none, demonstrating the compartmentalization skills that had served him well throughout his career. The only visible change in circumstances was Cassandra's absence. She had departed shortly after lunch, a car arranged to take her back to Boston with minimal disruption to the retreat schedule. By evening, as executives gathered for the welcome dinner in the lodge's grand dining room, I had settled into a new equilibrium, no longer maintaining the exhausting separation between personal and professional identities, simply existing as myself in all contexts. The relief of this integration was profound, like setting down a heavy burden I'd carried for so long I'd forgotten its weight. I was reviewing the next day's agenda with Marcus when I felt a familiar presence at my elbow. Andrew, dressed impeccably. For dinner, his expression pleasant and professionally engaged. "Ms. Blackwell," he said, his tone pitched to carry just far enough for those nearby to hear. I was hoping we might discuss the implementation timeline for the Harrington integration. I've had some thoughts about streamlining the process. The deliberate use of my professional name, the careful positioning of our interaction as purely business-focused, it was classic Andrew, reframing our dynamic on terms he found more favorable. "Of course, Mr. Wilson," I replied, matching his professional tone. "Perhaps after dinner? The lake path is quite pleasant for walking conversations." His momentary surprise at my easy acceptance was quickly masked with a nod. "That would be perfect. Thank you." As he moved away to speak with another executive, Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure that's wise?" he asked quietly. "Necessary, not wise," I corrected. "Better to address whatever he's planning directly than allow it to fester." Dinner proceeded pleasantly, with the initial shock of the morning's revelation giving way to more routine business discussions. I purposely seated myself at a table with regional directors, away from both Andrew and the executive team members who knew our history best. The conversation remained focused on business opportunities and strategic initiatives, precisely as it should at a leadership retreat. As coffee and dessert were served, I excused myself, indicating I needed to prepare for the following day's presentations. Andrew caught my eye across the room, a subtle nod confirming our planned conversation. 20 minutes later, I made my way to the lake's shore path, a well-lit trail that curved along the water's edge before looping back to the main lodge. Andrew was already waiting, standing at the trailhead with his hands in his pockets, gazing out over the darkened lake. The setting sun cast long shadows across the water, creating a scene of deceptive tranquility. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as I approached, his tone softer than the professional cadence he'd used earlier. "You mentioned the Harrington timeline," I prompted, indicating we should walk. We fell into step along the path, maintaining a professional distance between us. For several moments, Andrew said nothing, seemingly gathering his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice held none of the business focus he'd projected at dinner. "I spoke with Cassandra during her drive back to Boston," he said. "She's reconsidering our relationship." I said nothing, waiting for him to reach his actual point. This wasn't about Harrington's implementation timeline, and we both knew it. "She feels I misrepresented my position at Meridian," he continued, a note of practiced vulnerability entering his voice. "That I led her to believe I had more authority than I actually do." "Did you?" I asked simply. He shrugged, the gesture admitting more than his words. "I emphasized the possibilities of the role rather than its current limitations." We walked in silence for another stretch of path, the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore filling the space between us. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier," Andrew finally continued. "About me needing you to be less than you are. There might be some truth to that." The admission, partial as it was, surprised me. Andrew rarely acknowledged personal shortcomings, preferring to reframe narratives in ways that preserved his self-image. "But I also think," he added carefully, that we have an opportunity here. An opportunity? I repeated, instantly alert to the shift in his approach. Our personal relationship may be over, but professionally, we could be quite effective together. His tone warmed, shifting into the persuasive cadence he used for pitching investment concepts. Your strategic vision combined with my implementation skills, we could accelerate Meridian's growth significantly. I remained silent, recognizing the familiar pattern unfolding. This was Andrew's standard recovery technique, acknowledging just enough fault to appear reflective while simultaneously positioning himself as an essential ally moving forward. The Harrington merger is just the beginning, he continued, enthusiasm entering his voice. With your backing and my execution, we could target acquisitions that would transform Meridian's market position within 18 months. And what exactly are you proposing? I asked, my tone neutral. He stopped walking, turning to face me directly in the fading light. His expression held the earnest intensity that had once made him so compelling in negotiations. A professional partnership, he said. You as the strategic visionary, me as your implementation specialist. We expand my role to work directly with you on high-priority acquisitions, bypassing some of the more cumbersome approval processes. And there it was, the actual proposal beneath the relationship analysis and professional flattery. Andrew wanted to leverage our past connection to advance his position at Meridian, creating a special role that would elevate him above his peers and the normal organizational structure. That's an interesting suggestion, I said carefully, though it raises obvious governance concerns, which could be addressed through appropriate disclosures and oversight mechanisms, he countered quickly. The point is, we have a unique opportunity to create value from our unusual situation. I resumed walking, considering how best to respond to his transparent attempt at manipulation. The Andrew of 2 weeks ago, before he knew my true identity, would never have proposed such a partnership. This wasn't about recognizing my capabilities. It was about salvaging his position through strategic alliance with the power he had only just discovered. You know what's most interesting about this conversation? I said finally. 2 weeks ago, you were introducing Cassandra as your upgrade, because she understands ambition in ways I supposedly didn't. Now you're proposing we leverage my strategic vision and your implementation skills as complementary strengths. Andrew had the grace to look momentarily discomforted before recovering his composure. I've learned a great deal in the past 24 hours, he offered, his tone carefully modulated to convey humility without weakness. What you've learned, I corrected gently, is that I have power you didn't recognize. That realization hasn't changed your fundamental approach, only your target. When you thought I was just your wife, you discarded me for a partner who better served your ambitions. Now that you know I'm your CEO, you're proposing a partnership that would serve those same ambitions. His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. That's an unfair characterization. I'm simply identifying a professional opportunity that could benefit Meridian. No, Andrew, I said, stopping to face him directly. You're attempting to leverage our past relationship to create special circumstances for yourself. The same way you've leveraged every relationship throughout your career, not for mutual benefit, but for your personal advancement. For a moment, genuine frustration broke through his carefully maintained facade. What do you want from me? He demanded, his voice rising slightly. I'm trying to find a way forward here. What I want, I replied evenly, is for you to do the job you were hired to do, within the organizational structure that exists for every other director at Meridian. No special access, no bypassed processes, no preferential treatment. Even though we have a decade of history that could make us more effective together, that history is precisely why such an arrangement would be inappropriate, I countered. Our professional relationship needs more separation, not less. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of genuine agitation. So you're determined to keep me at arm's length professionally because of what happened personally? No, I corrected firmly. I'm determined to maintain appropriate corporate governance regardless of our personal history. The same standards apply to you as to every other executive at Meridian. We had completed the lake loop, arriving back at the path that led to the main lodge. Andrew paused, visibly recalculating his approach as he had so many times during our marriage when his initial strategy failed to yield the desired outcome. I understand, he said finally, his tone shifting back to professional courtesy. Thank you for the clarity. I'll focus on my departmental responsibilities and the standard reporting structure. The easy capitulation was suspicious. Andrew never abandoned a negotiating position without securing some concession, but his expression revealed nothing beyond polite acceptance, his professional mask firmly back in place. Is there anything else we need to discuss before tomorrow's sessions? I asked, maintaining the business focus he now seemed to prefer. Just one thing, he said, his tone deliberately casual. I received a call from Melissa Lambert at Goldman this afternoon. They're apparently quite interested in my perspective on potential acquisition targets in the fintech space. The implied threat was clear. If Meridian wouldn't provide the advancement opportunities he sought, other firms would. It was another familiar tactic, one he had deployed throughout his career when negotiations stalled, creating the perception of external demand to increase his internal value. Melissa is excellent at identifying talent, I acknowledged, neither discouraging nor encouraging the implied opportunity. You should always explore options that align with your career goals. Neutral response clearly wasn't what he had anticipated. Andrew studied me for a moment, perhaps searching for signs of concern or possessiveness that would indicate his leverage tactic had succeeded. I'll see you at tomorrow's session then, he said finally, nodding a professional goodbye before turning toward the lodge. I remained by the lake a few minutes longer, watching his retreating figure and reflecting on the predictability of his approach. Even now, facing circumstances that had upended his understanding of our entire relationship, Andrew defaulted to the same manipulative tactics that had defined his career, creating artificial competition, leveraging relationships for personal advancement, positioning himself as uniquely valuable. The realization carried a certain melancholy, not for the relationship lost, but for the recognition that Andrew would likely never change. His fundamental approach to life, to relationships, to professional advancement remained constant regardless of external circumstances. The only difference was that now, finally, I could see his maneuvers with complete clarity, unfiltered by the performances we had both maintained during our marriage. The second day of the retreat dawned clear and crisp, the kind of perfect autumn morning that made the Berkshires famous. I woke early, reviewing presentation materials in my cabin while enjoying coffee on the small porch overlooking the lake. The serenity of the setting contrasted sharply with the tension that had defined the previous day's revelation and conversations. My phone chimed with a message from Marcus. Breakfast in progress. Everyone present except AW. Housekeeping reports he cleared out his cabin before dawn. The information wasn't entirely surprising. After our conversation by the lake, Andrew had always preferred strategic exits to sustained confrontation. Leaving early allowed him to control the narrative around his departure, rather than facing another day of adjusted power dynamics. Any communication from him? I texted back. Marcus's response came quickly. Email to HR at 5:37 a.m. with resignation letter attached. Cited unforeseen personal circumstances and professional conflict of interest. So that was his choice. Rather than adapting to the new reality, Andrew had opted for complete withdrawal, removing himself from a situation where he couldn't dictate the terms of engagement. It was consistent with his pattern. When manipulation failed to produce the desired outcome, retreat and regroup became his preferred strategy. I considered how to address his departure with the executive team. The situation required transparency without unnecessary drama, acknowledgement without amplification. After finishing my coffee, I drafted a brief message to William and Marcus outlining my approach, then prepared for the day's sessions. The dining room hummed with conversation when I arrived for breakfast. Executives gathered in small groups, discussing the previous day's presentations and planned initiatives. William approached as I selected fruit from the buffet, his expression carefully neutral. "Our Director of Strategic Investment has made a rather abrupt exit," he noted quietly. "Anything I should be concerned about from last night's conversation?" "Nothing unexpected," I replied. Andrew explored the possibility of leveraging our personal history for professional advancement. When that approach wasn't successful, he opted for strategic withdrawal. William nodded, unsurprised. "And how? Do you want to handle this with the team? Transparently but efficiently. I'll address it at the beginning of the morning session, then move directly to business matters." The morning meeting began at 9:00, the conference room arranged as it had been the previous day, though with one conspicuous empty chair. I opened the session with deliberate calm, addressing the situation directly. "Good morning, everyone. Before we begin today's agenda, I want to address a personnel matter. Andrew Wilson has resigned from his position as Director of Strategic Investment, effective immediately. He cited personal circumstances and potential conflicts of interest given the unusual situation that emerged yesterday. I paused, allowing the information to register with the assembled executives. A few exchanged glances, but most maintained professional composure, having already noted his absence at breakfast. Rachel Tomlin will serve as acting director while we conduct a search for a permanent replacement. Our acquisition strategy remains unchanged, and all ongoing projects will continue as planned. Unless there are immediate questions about transitional arrangements, we'll proceed with today's scheduled discussions. No hands were raised, though I suspected conversations would flourish during the coffee break. With a nod to Marcus, I transitioned smoothly to the day's first presentation, effectively closing the topic of Andrew's departure. The remainder of the morning proceeded efficiently, with productive discussions of strategic initiatives and market positioning. If executives were curious about the personal implications of Andrew's resignation, they kept such thoughts private, focusing instead on the business matters at hand. By lunch, the initial curiosity had largely subsided, replaced by the professional engagement that characterized successful leadership retreats. As executives dispersed for the afternoon's breakout sessions, William joined me on the lodge's deck where I had paused to review notes for my closing presentation. "Nicely handled," he commented, settling into the chair beside me. "Though I must admit I expected more drama from Andrew's departure." "Drama requires an audience," I observed. By leaving at dawn, he deprived himself of that opportunity. William nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Charlotte tells me Cassandra posted quite the dramatic announcement on social media this morning. Something about toxic workplace dynamics and walking away from situations that don't serve her growth." I smiled slightly at the predictable positioning. Reframing rejection as choice is a time-honored tradition. I wish her well with it. 1 year to the day after Andrew had introduced Cassandra as his upgrade at our anniversary dinner, I found myself back at La Maison Rouge, not by sentimental design or painful coincidence, but because William Prescott had selected it for our quarterly off-site strategic planning dinner. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stepped through the familiar entrance, but the sharp sting of humiliation that had once accompanied those memories had faded to a dull acknowledgement of life's curious symmetries. The restaurant had changed little in the intervening year. The same ambient lighting, elegant decor, and attentive staff creating an atmosphere of understated luxury. What had changed profoundly was me. I walked through the space not as Andrew Wilson's carefully modulated wife, but as Olivia Blackwell Wilson. I had recently reclaimed my full name, integrating both identities legally as I had personally, CEO of a thriving financial institution and a woman fully comfortable in her own power. "Ms. Blackwell Wilson," the maitre d' greeted me with professional deference. "Your party is already seated in the private dining room." As I followed him through the main dining area toward our reserved space, A familiar figure at the bar caught my eye. Not Andrew, as some novelistic coincidence might have dictated, but Cassandra. She sat alone, elegant as ever in a designer dress, absently checking her phone while apparently waiting for someone. Our eyes met briefly as I passed, her expression shifting from surprise to careful neutrality, her chin lifting slightly in what might have been defiance or simple acknowledgement. I nodded politely without breaking stride, neither avoiding the encounter nor giving it more significance than it deserved. The executive dinner proceeded productively, Meridian's leadership team discussing expansion opportunities and technological investments with the engaged focus that had become our hallmark. I had rebuilt the executive ranks thoughtfully over the past year, promoting talent based on demonstrated capabilities rather than political connections, creating a team notable for both its diversity and its results. The European market expansion is exceeding projections by nearly 14%, Rachel reported, her confidence as our now permanent Director of Strategic Investment evident in her presentation. She had proven an exceptional choice, bringing innovative approaches that had earned respect throughout the organization. The board is extremely pleased with our performance this quarter, William added, particularly the innovation pipeline you've established with the quantum computing initiative. The discussion continued, focused entirely on future possibilities rather than past achievements. It was this forward orientation that had always driven me professionally, even when personal circumstances had required elaborate compartmentalization to maintain it. As our dinner concluded and executives began dispersing, William lingered behind, his expression thoughtful. "Quite a year," he observed once we were alone. "Meridian has transformed under your visible leadership." "Evolution rather than transformation," I corrected gently. "The vision was always there. What changed was simply, who articulated it?" William nodded, acknowledging the distinction. "And personally, how has that evolution progressed?" The question was offered with genuine care rather than curiosity, reflecting the friendship that had deepened beyond professional mentorship over the past year. "Integration continues," I replied honestly. "Some days were more successful than others, but the performance aspects have largely fallen away." "Good," William said simply. "That performance was never necessary for those who truly saw you." As we made our way toward the exit, I noticed Cassandra still at the bar, now joined by a man I didn't recognize. Younger than Andrew, expensively dressed, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to attention. They were clearly in the early stages of attraction, their body language conveying mutual interest as they leaned toward each other, sharing confidences over cocktails. The scene triggered not jealousy, but a curious sense of recognition. Cassandra following a pattern. I understood intimately, seeking partnership with someone whose status and ambition mirrored her own aspirations. The difference was that her upgrade from Andrew had apparently been as calculated as his had been from me, each moving toward relationships that better served their fundamental needs for status and validation. Outside, as we waited for our respective cars, William nodded toward the restaurant entrance. "Wasn't that—" "Yes," I confirmed simply. "Life's little symmetries." "And Andrew? Any word on how he's faring in Chicago?" "Advancing rapidly within a smaller sphere," I said. "Regional vice. President within 8 months. He's always been skilled at navigating organizational hierarchies." What I didn't share was the brief email I'd received from Andrew 3 months earlier. Not an apology or attempt at reconciliation, but a carefully worded request for professional reference regarding a potential client who had mentioned knowing me. The message had been formal, almost aseptically so, with no acknowledgement of our shared history beyond a perfunctory, "I hope this finds you well." I had provided the requested information with equal professionalism, maintaining the boundaries his actions had established. His response, a brief, "Thank you for your assistance," suggested he had found some equilibrium in his new circumstances, though whether he had gained any insight from our unraveling remained unclear. William's car arrived first, and with a warm handshake, he departed for the evening. Left alone on the sidewalk, I found myself reflecting on the perfect circularity of the moment, standing outside the same restaurant where 1 year earlier, Andrew had orchestrated what he believed would be my public diminishment. The cool evening, air carried hints of approaching spring, the seasonal shift promising renewal after winter's necessary dormancy. I breathed it in deeply, appreciating the moment's symbolism without being constrained by it. The past year had taught me that narratives were tools, not prisons, useful for making sense of experience, but dangerous when they limited future possibilities. My own car arrived, the driver holding the door with professional courtesy. As I settled into the back seat, my phone chimed with an incoming message, not from Andrew or anyone connected to my past, but from Dr. Eleanor Chen, the quantum computing specialist I had recently recruited to lead Meridian's most ambitious technological initiative. Breakthrough with the algorithmic model this evening. Results exceeding all projections. Can we meet first thing tomorrow to discuss implications? I smiled at the timing, the forward-looking message arriving precisely as I departed this place of completed history. Absolutely. My office, 7 a.m. Bring the full data set. As the car pulled away from the curb, I glanced back once at the restaurant, not with regret or nostalgia, but with the clear-eyed acknowledgement of distance traveled. The woman who had sat frozen in humiliation at that anniversary dinner no longer existed, not because she had been destroyed by public rejection, but because she had finally been integrated into something more complete. Andrew had introduced his upgrade exactly 1 year ago, never suspecting that his calculated cruelty would ultimately free me from the performance that had limited us both. In discarding me for someone he believed better served his ambitions, he had inadvertently catalyzed the integration I had avoided for years, the merging of Olivia Blackwell's professional power with Olivia Wilson's personal presence. The true upgrade, it turned out, had been neither his new relationship nor my professional revelation, but simply this: the freedom to exist as my complete self, undivided and undiminished by others' expectations. As Boston's lights blurred past the car windows, I opened my tablet to review Dr. Chen's preliminary findings, my mind already engaged with tomorrow's possibilities rather than yesterday's completed narratives. Andrew had intended our anniversary dinner as an ending, the conclusion of a wife, who no longer served his purposes. Instead, it had become a beginning, the first step toward a self no longer fragmented for someone else's comfort. The symmetry of tonight's encounter with Cassandra felt less like cosmic significance and more like simple closure, the final page of a chapter already concluded, allowing the story to progress toward what came next. And what came next, I realized with quiet certainty, would be shaped entirely by my own integrated voice. Neither the carefully modulated wife nor the strategically hidden CEO, but the woman, who had emerged from the intersection of both, carrying forward the wisdom each perspective had provided. Andrew had orchestrated my public humiliation as a demonstration of his power. He could not have known that in doing so he was actually returning mine, the power to exist completely as myself, without strategic diminishment or calculated performance. In the final accounting, his attempt to showcase his upgrade had revealed something far more valuable, the recognition that I had never needed upgrading at all, only the courage to stand fully in the light as exactly who I was. That courage, once found, had transformed everything. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.